Hello, Paul Kennedy here, author of Funkytown. I've got 2 copies. I thought that might look better than one. Lovely to see you tonight, and it's going to be great spending half an hour chatting about Funkytown with you. Just a little bit of context. I am in my 3rd son's bedroom at the moment, which is the only room in the house that is quiet enough for us to have our discussion and have our short program tonight and our book talk. Call it our book club. And as you can see, my 3rd child has fallen for basketball in a big way. He's just used pins to put up all of his basketball singlets. So that's not me trying to create some sort of sporting environment. That's little Leo. Funkytown has been 5 years in the making for me, and I thought it might be helpful just while you get around to making some comments. And please, by the way, comments about the book. You can ask me about the book if you haven't read it. I would not presume to think that you've all read Funkytown, so I can tell you as much or as little as you like about the book. But also something that I've found really rewarding is that people have been sharing their own observations and their own memories about being 17. The big feedback that I've had, probably throughout almost everyone I've spoken to that has read my book, is that it feels like I was writing about their childhood and writing about their crucial year in their last year of high school, which is really satisfying for me. And it's called Funkytown, of course, because that was our name for Frankston, where I grew up. But I've been really interested and fascinated to hear people say it felt like you were writing not only about my upbringing, but it felt like you're writing about my town, and that might be a country town. Swan Hill was one. I had a terrific note saying that it felt like you're writing about Swan Hill. I guess we all had those similar themes of growing up and going to the pubs, and the infrastructure might have been the same in a country town that it was in Frankston back in 1993. Although it was a suburb, we're still far enough from the city. So that's been terrific. So please share your experience. Thank you, Louise, for that warm welcome. And by the way, I'm new to this, but I have done something similar on television for 13 years. On News Breakfast, where we like to read comments. So send in your comments. I've got them all here. And good evening, Wendy, Sharon, Sabine, and Joy Bell. I'm a local from Aspendale. When are you at our local bookshop? I was at the Chelsea bookshop today, not far from Aspendale. Chelsea's got a great bookshop, actually. I didn't even know that it existed. It's been there for 6 months. So Chelsea is probably the closest one to you there in Aspendale. Janet has a comment here. I listened and loved the book, especially that you narrated it yourself. It was also the first time I'd really ever revisited the sad murders, which I couldn't ever bring myself to do. Just on that, it's been I guess difficult for some people in Frankston to look back at that time in 1993. So I think maybe I can give you an overview now of the book and include in that the murders, because some people call them the murders. Locally, we call them the murders. It was a time when there was a serial killer in Frankston, and he murdered 3 women randomly without any particular planning. He was a serial killer and he was jailed for 30 years. Eventually, he was given life, and then it was taken down to 30 years non-parole. That period comes up in 18 months. So there was a discussion around the ongoing imprisonment of that person. But yes, it's been a big talking point, of course, in Frankston. We remember that time very, very well, and it's left scars on the community, not least of all with the families who are involved as well, and all of our love and best wishes have always been with the families of those 3 murdered women. So that's the reference there. I've got a great question here from Kylie. Hi, Paul. What inspired you to become a writer? Well, that's a lot of what's in the book actually leads to that point, because in my high school years, I was, fairly wayward and directionless, other than wanting to be a footballer and an athlete. That was my driving force. But in year 12, when all things were falling apart around me and we had that awful time in Frankston, there was not only one teacher, there was a group of teachers at our school at Patterson River Secondary College, which is still our local school, and my boys go there. And they've still got wonderful teachers, they always have. But that English department was fantastic at that stage. And in year 12, I mentioned in the book Mrs. Mack, who was my literature teacher. And she not only really ignited a love of reading in me, and she also encouraged me to be a better writer in our various assignments and our reviews of texts that we were studying at the time. And Mrs. Mack and other teachers at the school were pushing me to be a better writer and to put more work. Mrs. Golden was another English teacher who was frustrated that I wouldn't do much drafting. I was quite cavalier about it all. But eventually I got the bug, basically, through years 12. And although I got expelled at the end of the year, and seemingly had no direction, those seeds were sown in year 12 that I wanted to write stories for a living, and then that led to journalism the year after. So I got expelled, but the year after I really just started writing letters to the Herald Sun. They eventually gave me a job as a copy kid, and that was all because I wanted to write. And I wanted to write stories for a living. So, yeah, I guess I wanted to be a writer back then, but, it's been a long time in the making that I would write a book like this and see myself doing that. But that's why I wanted to be a writer. It was the last stages of high school that turned me around and set me on that path. So, and now I'm pleased to have written 5 books, and I feel like I'm just getting started, even though, I feel like a veteran in many ways, particularly in the news game. This is from Holly. Thank you, Holly. Paul, your book was so honest, and you have obviously changed your attitudes on many things. Thank you for demonstrating that young men can become more enlightened and overcome the cultural milieu of their hometown culture. Thank you, Holly. I really appreciate that. That's an interesting point for me because, in writing about the culture of boys becoming men in Frankston in the time where I was stepping from one part of my life to the next part, and trying to be that macho young man that I thought that I needed to be to fit in, and having so many conflicting feelings around that, it was confronting to write about the type of person that I was and my behaviours. And I did want to address not only the culture, but also my decisions and why I made decisions to go and binge drink, to treat young women and girls as conquests, even though I had no idea what I was doing in that area. I really just wanted to fall in love. But these were the sort of the mask of bravado that I was wearing. To go back and have a look at that was confronting, but in the end, I wouldn't say it was difficult, because I'd committed to being honest, at least, and provide that scrutiny. I was happy to place myself under that scrutiny, and try and figure out why I was the way I was. And confusing me at that time was the fact that I came from a very stable, very peaceful home with 2 wonderful role models as parents, and then at 15, 16, thrust myself into this whole new culture of this blokey culture of the local footy club and all the rest of it, in the local pubs in Frankston and all of those sorts of things. So I figured out some things along the way, and I think I sort of explained that in the book without putting too much judgment on myself. I use the word scrutiny rather than judgment. But to your point, to become more enlightened and overcome that culture, was more than that. It was coming to a point where I could own up for my own decisions, because I wasn't the way I was just because of the culture. I wanted to be a part of that as well, and I made those decisions to be that type of guy. So there were other people involved in that culture, like I mentioned in the book. Ant Harvey was a great example. He was playing at St Kilda. He was there. He was a Seaford boy all the time, but I used him as a character and an example of someone that can be in a culture that's not healthy, and we know all the things that are dangerous and wrong about that type of violent young male culture. But he was making good decisions where I was making bad decisions. So it wasn't just the culture; it was me, So hopefully I'm more enlightened, or maybe just a little bit more experienced and calmer than I used to be. So thank you. That was a great comment. Laura, g'day, Laura, has got a question here. Hi, Paul. In your experience, what are some of the best sides of Australian masculinity, and what can we celebrate about this culture? One of the ways that I've explained this in the book is that I had 2 football homes, I guess, back in the day. One was the Seaford Football Club, where my brother was playing, and all the people I knew and sort of looked up to and adored, and people I liked. I wasn't there, no one was dragging me there. I loved being part of Seaford, but that was a wilder sort of environment, and I would suggest that with the violence around the fights that we saw at the local pubs and many other aspects of it, that was what we would now call toxic masculinity. I don't use the term toxic masculinity in the book, not that I'm trying to get away from it. It's just not a term that we used back in the 90s, and I tried to stay true to the language and my life through the eyes of a 17-year-old. So, but we know that's part of what we call toxic masculinity. Laura, your question goes to the good parts of the best sides of Australian masculinity. Well, I've got 2. One is the example set by my father, who was a very kind man, very supportive of the women in his life, as he should be, but someone that had great manners, who looked imposing, who had tattoos on his arms that he did himself when he was in the Navy, which hinted to a wilder youth, but someone that was very gentle and became a non-drinker and spent as much time as he could with his children, myself, my brother, and my 2 sisters, albeit after working long days driving a truck. So Dad was a great example of the best of masculinity in my eyes. And the other part was another stream that runs through the book is I talked about my 2 football homes. The other home was a team called the Southern Stingrays. And that was a fledgling competition, which is now well established. And in fact, you'll hear the Stingrays and the Dragons and the Chargers, all these teams mentioned in the next week, because they're going to provide all of these draftees for the national draft this week. So that was the competition I was in. The Stingrays were coached by a man called Greg Hutchison, who I thought was a wonderful role model as well. And the boys and young men that were in that team, to me, was the best of masculinity. And people often say that, they might, if they don't understand, and I know that many people haven't got that insight, that all football cultures are the same, and they're all that, that blokiness, or they might have negative views of football environments, but they're not all the same. And the Stingrays, we were young guys who were trying to get the best out of ourselves, who wanted to be good teammates, who enjoyed each other's company, who trained hard and wanted to impress each other and fit in. So the Stingrays, I encourage anyone who's reading the book to perhaps look for the contrasts that I've deliberately used as examples of good masculinity and very dangerous types of masculinity. So thanks for that, Laura. Kay has a comment here. Hi, Paul. I have a grandson going into year 12 next year. I've recommended your book as a great read for him and parents. Thanks, Kay. That's lovely to hear that someone who's going to be that age would be reading the book. I guess it's worth pointing out too that age group, so it's 17-year-olds, and doesn't matter if you're boys or girls, the themes there are very common, and once again, the feedback has been that it's so familiar and resonates with a lot of readers, and through different time periods as well. So not just those who went to school, those of us old enough to go to school in the 90s, but an interesting example is my nephew Joel, who I mentioned in the acknowledgements as one of the early readers. He read the penultimate draft. My English teacher would be very pleased to know that I did a lot of drafting for this one. The penultimate draft was given to Joel, my nephew, who was in year 12 at that stage, and I took advice from him too on different matters, and wanted to know whether he thought I was hitting the mark with certain stories. Of course, it was all based on true stories, but I was conscious of hitting the right mark with those different themes that I've been talking about and answering questions on. So Joel read it, gave me great feedback. He's a very insightful young man, and the one thing that jumped out at me then and was real vindication, I guess, was there are several parts of this masculinity discussion, and one of them that was big for me was emotional suppression. And so in writing the book, there came a time where I spent so much time by myself writing this book that you start to wonder, well, is this just me? I'm writing about things that I think are uniform experience for people that age, but is it just me? And Joel's feedback was he really connected with that emotional suppression. Once again, not that I used that term emotional suppression, because it was something that I never would have used when I was 17, but it was about an example was that I would write in my journal in 1993 about how I was feeling, and about relationships with girls that were always very poor, and I just couldn't bring myself to communicate how I felt on any level, anywhere near the level that I would have liked to. I wanted to fall in love, but that was going to be very difficult if I couldn't express myself. So I was suppressing all of these different emotions, and I couldn't even. My best friend Adam, who's a big character in the book, we would talk about almost everything, but I couldn't quite even bring myself to talk about how I was really feeling in certain situations, which I think is a real shame, and it's something that I watch out for with my own sons. And I hope that they, and my wife Kim and I, really hope that they can express themselves. But getting back to my point about Joel reading it, he was 17, he's going through year 12 in 2020, and he knew, or 2019, he picked up on that and said, yeah, that's exactly how I feel. So yeah, I think it's a good thing to give to your so I'm just reading the comments here, to give to your 17-year-old son or nephews or grandsons, or even your daughters and granddaughters, and hopefully they can maybe get some lessons along the way. By the way, it's not a how-to guide, so I would be worried if some youngsters read parts of it and thought that's what I'm going to do, because you'll end up getting kicked out of school and arrested. An interesting person has joined the chat here. PK, your literature teacher is very impressed with penultimate. Feel free to ask any other questions if you like, Kim, because Kim is my literature teacher, Mrs. Mack, in the book. And so I would like to hear any pressing questions you've got, Kim, aka Mrs. Mack. But thank you very much. Penultimate. Can't remember where I first heard that word, but I am prone to looking at thesauruses to try and get better words, even now. Kath. So while we wait for Mrs. Mack to send through another question, Catherine Wheatley. Hi, Paul. Loved you on the ABC. Miss seeing you. Thank you very much. Martin said Mrs. Mack is my hero. So I reckon we're going to hear another question from Mrs. Mack. Thank you, Catherine. By the way, I'm preempting any other questions about the ABC. Very briefly, I'm thoroughly enjoying my new role with the ABC, which is a general sports reporter. I've been pleased to do many stories in that role, and I'm doing a lot more writing for the ABC Sport website. So check out those stories. We've got a great sports team there, and still chipping away at some 7:30 report stories as well. If the dog is barking in the background, you're wondering, we do have a new dog, so she's anxious maybe to get back inside. The question here from Lynn. G'day, Lynn. What age boys do you recommend to read your book? That's a great question. It only just sort of arose as a talking point with my editor when we were Mick Luby, by the way. A shout out to Mick, who's the wonderful editor that knocked Funkytown into good shape. He mentioned that it could be really appropriate. It felt like it was a young adult's book. So I would say anywhere from 13 up, 12, 13, would be people that can read the book. My 13-year-old son, Gus, listened to the entire book and understood all of its themes quite well. And, I think from that age, you start to get a great awareness anyway about the stuff that we're talking about, or the stuff that I'm talking about in the book, even the more complex ideas of falling in love, or maybe they're not complex, but they feel complex at the time. Karen Semple has said, can't wait to read the book. Thank you very much, Karen. Karen revealed to me in a message very recently that she went to see Park, and I remember Karen from my very earliest days in primary school. So, Karen, I hope you like the book, and please give me some feedback. Joy Bell said, what years did you play with the Stingrays? Rob Dean was coach when we were part of it. I was in 1993, so that was Greg Hutchison. I'm pretty sure Rob Dean was the coach not long after that. So Greg actually went back into the AFL and ended up coaching Melbourne there for a stint, and finished up as head of football at St Kilda. So I never played under Rob Dean. I was in 1993. That was the second year of the competition. Back to Mrs. Mack. Geez, Paul, no pressure. Did COVID lockdown make the writing and drafting of Funkytown harder, or did it help with fewer distractions? Great question. Looking back, all the lockdowns were so different. 2021, I don't think I could have written this book, the final stages of this book, in 2021, because the lockdowns were much different to the than the previous ones. 2020 lockdowns, I think from memory, they were 2 long lockdowns, and it seemed to be that I'd work from home for news breakfast, finish work at about 9 o'clock, and then with no dog in the backyard, I used to just sit out the back and do a lot of writing. So, in fact, I think the lockdown through that period was a great help, and of course, I was getting great help as well from those very kind people who are offering advice along the way and steering me in the right direction. So it was, looking back, that time period was probably something that I'll treasure, because I had time to think, and not only write, but doing the thinking. And in hindsight, looking back at the writing process, the time that I was thinking, or even putting my headphones on and going for my hour walks through Seaford, which is of course the setting of the book, then that was really the something that was really important too. I've read that from other writers too, saying that sometimes you do your best writing when you put the laptop down and then you go, and then the ideas are still swirling, and you get some great ideas for which direction to take a chapter or anything like that. So thank you, Mrs. Mack. There has been comment along the way about perhaps overstating the influence of the role models in my life, which I don't think is true. The Mrs. Mack and the other the other people that I looked up to in 1993 absolutely steered me in the right direction. And one of the highlights that's come back from teachers particularly is looking at that role that Mrs. Mack played, and for not even sort of working these things out in memory. I had the letter that Mrs. Mack gave me at the end of the year, and so word for word, that gave me further evidence as to what role she was able to play, you were able to play in making sure that I was okay after I blew everything up and got expelled from school. So thank you again. Not to put you under any more pressure, let's move on. Marilyn Prentice, looking forward to reading your book. Hello, Kim. Just a pity Jane isn't watching this. So Jane, I don't know if I'm spoiling this for you or not, Marilyn, but Jane is mentioned in the book. So I don't know whether it would be a spoiler if she was watching this or not. Jane Prentice is an example of a student that I used in the book who was exceptional. So it was and we've only got a few minutes to go, so I'll get through these, and I will explain why I was expelled. But in recreating the school, and there are many different parts of my life, the pubs, the football, but I had to recreate my school, and it was a rough and ready place, and I think anything that could go wrong at school did go wrong. But also, that it gets back to what I say about culture and choices. There was a culture there of wonderful learning in parts, but other times, I wasn't taking my learning seriously. But there were students like Jane who were at that school who were exceptional in everything they did, and every day of every school year, every day of the school year, and then from year 12. Were able to springboard into great professional lives and further education and everything. So I needed to make that clear that I wasn't, in no way was I describing an environment that would shape us all and, in the same way. We all have our own choices as young people. And, some of the students that I went to were the brightest and most ambitious and most competent, people that I've ever met. So, and some of them have gone on and lived magnificent lives, and many of them actually that I come across all the time. So thank you for watching, Marilyn. And Kim said, hi, Marilyn. Great to hear from you. But I guess you could probably read that in the comments yourself. Martin, why do you think more Aussie men don't read books? Blokes are reading this book, and I think that, as storytellers, we need to offer. It's still a word that a very wise person in the industry has mentioned to me over and over: authentic. If you can make a story authentic and it relates to what people are going through, then it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman. Then that book is something that's going to appeal to you. So, but I dare say that you might have more insight than I have into these things. I hope to keep telling stories that appeal to men as well as women, and that's something that I'm really excited about. I felt that Funkytown was some validation of thoughts that I had along those lines. Anyway, I'm a D supporter. What team do you go for? Collingwood. Thank you, Joybell. Joybell following up again with, why were you expelled? I got drunk and broke into the school hall, and there was a security guard there who called the police. If you want to read more about that in more detail, I would suggest Funkytown, maybe about there, towards the end of the year, of course. Now, I'm just about to wrap up. Thank you all for joining. I want to make sure that I didn't miss anyone out. Beverly, thank you. Miss you at the ABC. I'm still on the ABC, just not on the breakfast show. But I am enjoying the breakfast show. Tony Armstrong doing a great job, much better than I did previously. Julie, just finished your book, Paul. Absolutely enjoyed every page. Congratulations. Thank you, Julie. It means a lot to everyone that reads it and then sends a note, that's for sure. Janet, Mrs. Mack, I need to know why you picked that book that you inspired young Paul, and where can I buy it? Jump online if you want to read the book called I Heard the Owl Call My Name by Margaret Craven. You can still find it online. I think sales have actually jumped for Margaret Craven's book since Funkytown came out. I've no evidence to back that up, but lots of love for Mrs. Mack, by the way. Kim, if you're still there. Carol says, I know a lot of fab book. Thank you. Yes. I've only got a minute to go. Kylie says, thank you. Fantastic answer. Thank you very much for asking that question. Yeah, Lynn, what other books do you like reading? I like reading a lot of books. I bought today, actually, I'll finish with this story. Do you have, and also Louise says, do you have an author that inspired or inspires you? Also have many of their favorite books. So I went on a tour today of bookstores around Melbourne throughout the afternoon, visited many, and couldn't help myself. I bought 2 books. Helen Garner's latest book, which is another collection of her diary entries. I love Helen Garner, and I've been reading her books recently, going back and reading books from the 1990s. And also I bought Billy Connolly's book today because I just look at that man's face and I want him to talk to me. So I'm looking forward to reading Billy Connolly's book as well. But many different authors. And yes, I think we're running. And Catherine says, men read books. We have 2,000 in our library. There you go. Thank you, Kim. Great session. And thank you all. Thanks. And I think I'm appreciating that you're answering each other's questions. So there you go, Martin. Your question was answered by Catherine. That is it. I'm over time. I could talk more, as you know, but that's it for my Facebook Live. Thank you to the Better Reading website. You can purchase Funkytown on the Better Reading website. Thank you to Better Reading Facebook. Thank you to my young son, Leo, for his basketball singlet collection. He's not watching now, so I won't be able to say anything about his choice of sport. But basketball's okay if he doesn't want to play in the AFL like I wanted to do. Thank you.